All right, hello everyone. Just letting everybody get in. There's a few folks still popping in from the waiting room. Let's see. All right, looks like we're good. So to start, my name's Johnny. I'm an admissions counselor here at Stony Brook University. Welcome and thank you for joining us here today. We have two presenters that I'd like to introduce. We have Shelly Germana, the interim vice provost of curriculum and undergraduate education. And we have Stacy Zanetis, the assistant dean and director of undergraduate colleges. So I'll let you guys take it away, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Johnny. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Welcome today, so we can get started. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen at this point. So welcome. As Johnny mentioned, my name's Shelly Germana. I'm the interim vice provost here at Stony Brook University, and Stacy Zanetis is with me today, who's the assistant dean and director of the undergraduate colleges. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just giving you a kind of broad overview about the Stony Brook Advantage, what we call the Stony Brook Advantage, that has really been formulated around student success and the way in which we approach supporting students here at Stony Brook. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time giving kind of a broad view about that. And then Stacy's going to talk more specifically about some of the ways in which we support new students specifically here at Stony Brook. So we'll leave the first portion for us to go through some of the slides, and then we're going to leave about 20 minutes at the end for any questions that you may have, and then we'll be able to hopefully engage in a dialogue and discussion with you about some of your biggest interests and concerns about looking ahead at Stony Brook University or about higher education in general. So I'm just going to start off. It's not letting me advance. There we go. So here's really our overview. And it's just a quick snapshot of how we'll spend our time here today. I'm really going to focus a little bit on some of our improvements here at Stony Brook, as well as our vision and initiatives and how we support and enrich the student experience. So hopefully people are at least moderately familiar with Stony Brook. We are one of SUNY's 4 university centers. We like to argue with Buffalo a little bit about being the flagship institution in the SUNY system. It's actually really an exciting time to be a student here at Stony Brook. We've had the highest ranking in university history, the highest 4-year graduation rate in university history. And if you've been following the news over the last year and a half, we've become a national exemplar with upward income mobility for students from low income households. We're really proud of that. And this is without getting into any of the cutting edge research and innovation that Stony Brook has really always been known for. So it's a really exciting time. It's an exciting time to be a student here. I think I can speak for Stacy when I say it's a really exciting time to work here as well and to be part of this. Now, this isn't just about metrics. I always like to say that to families, because I think when you see, the U.S. News and World Report, the graduation rates, it's not just about metrics. This is really about supporting students and their success and leveraging all of the resources to support that we have to support all students, while simultaneously remaining focused on academic excellence. And that's really important as a public AAU, which is a prestigious public university, as well as a Research One university that Stony Brook is. Now, here's a little bit of the history. In 2014, then university president Sam Stanley participated in a White House conference and announced that Stony Brook was actually going to achieve a 60% 4-year graduation rate by 2020. Now, the university community actually jokes. This was at the White House under the Obama administration. It was a conference on higher education. And the university community actually jokes that we found out about this goal for 60% from a White House press release. So we actually didn't know anything about it. And then we found out through this White House press release. What's interesting is that last year I was at a Lumina Foundation conference. I actually met the person that had written the press release, who then, sort of backtracked a little bit to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's how you found out about it." But it was very comical that I met, the individual that had actually written it. Now, at the time, we were hovering when that commitment was made. We'd actually been hovering around 47%. So this was actually 60% was a pretty big stretch goal for us. But we were up to the challenge. And I think more than that, there was a real understanding of what the benefit to students would be if we could achieve this. So we made the commitment to improve the quality of the undergraduate student experience toward improving our retention and our graduation rates. How did we do that? And that's part of, I think, the biggest part of the Stony Brook advantage. First and foremost, we put the student at the center of everything. So any decision when we are considering policy, when we're reviewing policy, when we're looking at student experience, we put the student at the center of that because it's important to understand these things from the student perspective. We also take a one student at a time approach. Now, if you were paying attention to one of the previous slides, you'll note that Stony Brook has over 18,000 undergraduate students. And nonetheless, our philosophy has been one student at a time. How do we do that? Well, we're data informed. So we're using a lot of data to help guide that outreach and guide our connections and our approaches and the way in which we individualize services for students. As well as evidence-based practices. So we're really involved in the research. We're really involved in the national conversation around supporting students. And I think, the most important thing is really also remaining true to our mission as a public institution, which is to try to keep social mobility and equity at the forefront at all times. And that's really important for our mission as a public institution. So these things, our goals, the values, and our approach allowed us to exceed the initial commitment of 60%. So not only did we actually meet that commitment of 60%, but we exceeded it by an additional 5% graduation rate in 2020. So we are now at 65% for a 4-year graduation rate. This was actually an 18 percentage point increase over 7 years. So really significant. You can kind of see from this graph here kind of where we fell previously and the way in which we were able to move to increase. Now, we're proud of this, okay, but we're even prouder of what this actually means, because the numbers aren't just numbers. It's not just a percentage. It means that over 2,350 additional students were able to graduate on time across this 7 years that would not have graduated or may not have graduated under the previous rate. And even more so, that amounts to a $160 million economic benefit to students. So that's $32 million saved in tuition and fees. So that's money that doesn't go back to the institution. So it's not additional fees that we are somehow getting. That's money saved in tuition for students having graduated on time, as well as $133 million in the additional earning capacity, because students are able to enter into the workforce much sooner and start their post-graduate careers or their professional school or grad school endeavors. I think one of the biggest things that we're proud of, though, is the way in which those rates actually translated into largely closing our equity gaps. So as we propelled the graduation rate forward, we were also able to, again, with a commitment to our public mission, largely close most equity gaps in the graduation rates. And so you can see here for our 4-year grad rate, you can see that Black and Hispanic students moving much more closely to white students, and actually our Pell students and students, so our Pell students and our more affluent students actually at the 4-year rate coming just about even. And in the 6-year rate, Black and Hispanic students outpacing graduation rates for white students, and our Pell recipients, so our less affluent students who are Pell eligible and receive Pell, actually outpacing are more affluent students. So this is really significant from our perspective in the way that we have been able to propel equity and student social mobility forward. Now, I mentioned earlier that that one of the ways in which we have tried to approach student success and have really tried to promote student support and the advantage here at Stony Brook has had a lot to do with the way in which we approach students one at a time, a philosophy of approaching students one at a time, as well as a philosophy around success and the way in which that philosophy of success and always putting the student at the center of that philosophy of success has really helped motivate us and helped craft our decision making. It's also the case that students need to know that people know and feel that people care about them. And they need to feel supported in all dimensions of their wellness. So that's the other piece of keeping students at the center. And that's really what continues to drive our vision forward, is that keeping the student at the center always checks us that in how we are supporting student growth and wellness. Now, of course, as many things do, I think many folks here would say that this really started with a group. So when that commitment had been made, a group was immediately formed, as it typically is in a variety of industries, but certainly in higher ed. So it was a university-wide academic success team with campus leaders all across the institution who actually still meet every week. We meet every week. It used to actually be before COVID, we'd meet at 7:30 a.m. And there happened to be bagels at the time. Obviously, there's no more bagels. Our institutional research folks actually calculated that there were over 8,000 bagels during that period that were actually consumed, and dozens of pounds of cream cheese. So when I think about dozens of pounds of cream cheese, it doesn't particularly make me happy to think of maybe how much of that I ate, but it really was a very committed group. And they're still showing up even without the 8,000 bagels. So that group really met, and that group began to form a narrative around success. And I think particularly for the students that might be on this call or on the webinar, think through for yourselves what it is that success means to you, right? So just think to yourselves, like, what is it that success means? And here at Stony Brook, I mean, that's going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different students. And there's no one size fits all for what success looks like. And that's really important to understand. And we approach success from that perspective here at Stony Brook. There is not necessarily a one size fits all. Institutions measure it in terms of 4 and 6 year graduation rate, and particularly 4-year graduation rate. But the ways in which success may look very differently depending for the student, or how you get to success may look very differently as well. So this group, this academic success team, really began building a culture of success on campus. We began talking about academic success in everything that we did and promoting success for students in their own way of thinking about it, as well as within the university community. And this essentially transformed Stony Brook to have people, from executive leaders to faculty to staff to students, talking about success 10 years ago wasn't really happening. So one of the things, actually, and I think for those of you, so if you are high school seniors right now, those of you out there are families of high school seniors, right? You'd be the class of 2025, right? And so I'm hoping, right? Yes, Stacy? All right. And so we weren't talking about that before. So we weren't saying to you when you come in, right? So if you were to come into Stony Brook right away, we would begin talking to you about what it means to be a part of the class of 2025. And that wasn't really happening 10 years ago. And that's made a really significant difference in how we as a community understand success here and support each other in the goals toward student success. Now, the leadership was also, in addition to that kind of narrative, the leadership also was able to make an investment that had a significant impact, particularly in our Finish in 4 initiative. We were able to add success advisors who are focused on student degree progress, class-based messaging. So you actually have success advisors that are assigned to the particular class years that help students move along strategically and in a way that supports their growth and their progress toward graduation, but also their goals post-graduation as well as technology with tools, with advising appointment tools, with mobile-facing academic planning tools, that also includes reminder, deadline, checklist tools as well. So this technology piece combined with the investment of success, people dedicated to student success and actually working with students directly around their success, created a huge advantage here for students to move forward more successfully toward a 4-year graduation rate. But here's the thing about technology, I will say, just as kind of a side note, a parentheses. Here's the thing, you can be high tech, but you also have to be high touch. And I think some institutions, some colleges and universities had really initially fallen into the idea of this, like, technology will set you free, right? It's the more technology we have, the more successful that students will be, right? Technology will kind of set you free. And that's all you need, right? You don't need as many people because you have technology, and you should be able to reduce the number of people following up and interacting with students. Not true, right? Technology is important, but our faculty and staff are actually our biggest assets in the way that they utilize technology to support you, the students, and to create individualized experiences for you. And that's really where our academic support and enrichment programs come in. And the way in which those programs, through the technology, have been leveraged to support and provide students with those kinds of individualized experiences. So I'm going to transition now. Stacy's going to spend a little bit of time. I've given you kind of the broad scope, broad brush of our university commitment and our leadership commitment to success. Even at the highest levels of leadership, we are partners. We believe we are partners in student success. So Stacy's going to talk a little bit more about some of the particulars as students move into the experience, some of what they may encounter.
Thank you, Shelley. So Shelley spent a good amount of time talking, I say Shelley talks about the why and I talk about the how, and how, this will affect you, how you will interact with both the people that work at the institution, people that work at the university, but also how you will interact with the university as well. And as you can see, there are a lot of different programs that are targeted to that, really targeted to making sure that you're not only transitioning successfully to university, but that you're being successful to university. And something that, Shelley talks about a lot in her meetings, I talk about a lot in my meetings, is that idea, as she said, of what success individually means to you, because that idea is going to be different for you. I'm sure it's going to be different for your parents. I'm sure it's going to be different for some friends of yours, but really for you as a student, what does that look like? And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of our seminar courses and some other ways that we really try and structure ways for students to start to think about that, start to engage with that, and then start to engage, as Shelley said, with some of the people that work here at the university, because that really is our superpower. It's the staff and the faculty here at Stony Brook who are dedicated to your success, who are dedicated to making sure that you continue here every year, that you do well every year, and that you graduate, in 4 years or less. A good number of you come in and ask to graduate in less than 4 years. And my question is always why? What's your rush? But as you can see here, there's a lot of different programs and there's a lot of different people that work here, both for first year students, for transfer students, for continuing students. The undergraduate colleges is the program that I work with very closely, and I oversee. It's targeted and dedicated specifically to first year students. We know that that's going to be a big transition and a big change in a myriad of ways, for students. And it's something that, we dedicate a lot of time and resources to. Some of you may have heard about our educational opportunity program. Again, lots of schools have them, and ours is really, really successful, very successful. It's kind of the flagship, again, as we fight with Buffalo, we think this EOP program here at Stony Brook is the flagship of EOP programs, across the state and probably nationally as well. And then we have various, university honors programs. You may have heard about the Honors College or University Scholars or WISE program, which is Women in Science and Engineering. And again, targeted to students, making sure that it's a smaller group, that they have someone, and this is true for all the programs here, they have someone that they can reach out to. They have someone that they can talk to, that they have someone that they can ask questions about. They have someone who knows their face and their name. And so you're more than just that number. Like Shelly said, you're not just that statistic, but you're that student. You're Brian, you're Rachel, you're Stacy, you're Shelly. And we're trying to get to know you and help you be, the person that you're looking to grow into. We're very proud of the Academic Success and Tutoring Center. It's very popular on campus, as you can imagine. And I'll talk a little bit more, about what they do, but it's a relatively new program or department here at the university. But again, it's focusing not only on your academic success, but it can help in other ways, like as well. Again, a more holistic view of you as a student. And we have advising services, part of some of these other programs. A lot of what they do, and a big part of what they do is advising, advising in the ways that you think about, which are graduation requirements and talking about what you'd like to major in or change your major in. So there are, advisors for some of these special groups, like I mentioned. There are advisors, general advisors, there are major advisors. So there's different, layers of support really for students. So as I mentioned, I work with the undergraduate colleges. You can see here the 6 different undergraduate colleges, and lots of schools have first year programs. Stony Brook is a little bit different in comparison to other schools. And, as you can imagine, I'm pretty proud of it. So the way that Stony Brook is a little different, in comparison to other schools with some similar first year experience programs, are these themes that you see here. So all first year students are placed in one of these 6 undergraduate colleges. We do let them preference, and we try and give students their first or second choice. We are, again, very proud that up to around 90%, 92% of students get their first or second choice in terms of undergraduate college. But it's a really unique and interesting program. And again, it's something that's relatively new in the history of the school. I mean, the school is relatively young, I guess, as well. But again, the goal is to help and make sure that first year students do well right from the start, right from the get-go. And we try and do that in a lot of different ways. Again, this is the way that we do it here at Stony Brook, for first year students. I'll talk a little bit about, what that means for transfer students, what that means for, continuing students as well, because we know, the first year is just not the only time that you're going to be here. But we think it's a really kind of innovative, interesting program, and an interesting way to kind of make sure that, again, as I said, you're more than just that number. You're more than just that statistic. You are that whole person. And that's really something that, the university as a whole focuses on in all these different areas. Really what we do is, as the slide says right here, is supporting student success. And that's everywhere. Again, I go back to the metaphor of the different layers of support, the overlapping Venn diagrams, like creating this framework / safety net, for students. And that starts, from our perspective with advising, it really starts with making sure that students know what it is that they want to do, that we work with them on a plan, that we're making sure that they have the right information, and then, be there to answer questions, help support them, you really at every step of their academic journey. Again, we'll go back to the faculty and staff teams, that work with students, all over campus. We're talking about thousands of people, that work directly, with students. For those of you that are going to be living on campus, excuse me, the residential hall staff and their dedication and focus to, again, helping you with your transition. That may not mean that they're giving you tutoring, specifically for your chemistry class. But there's kind of learning pains and growing pains with the first year and beyond. Like even as a transfer student, coming from a different school to Stony Brook is going to be a change and an adjustment. And the residence hall staff is really, really dedicated to making sure that they can help students and support students, with that adjustment. I spoke a little bit about our seminar courses. We have them, again, as I said, both for first year students, both in the fall and spring semester, a requirement, but also for our transfer students as well. They're advised to take ADV 101, which again is a course specifically designed to help transfer students with their transition. I say transition a lot, but it's a big thing and it's an important thing. And we want to make sure that you're hitting the ground running right from the start. There are other things that really, ATAS, which is God, now I'm forgetting what they're, I'm blanking what the acronym stands for. Academic Transfer Advising
Services.
Yes, jeez, don't tell Deb.
Stacey, I was gonna say you've been too long out of general advising.
Yeah. So ATAS sees our continuing students. So after they finish their first year, and they work a lot very closely, obviously, as I said, with the continuing students, but also very closely with the transfer students. So in terms of, talking about the week of the transfer and making sure that they are getting the things that they need, to be successful. They have transfer assistants that work specifically with that population as well, because we know, right, the things that they're going to have questions about, the things that they need, it's not going to be exactly the same as a first year student, but it's also not going to be exactly the same as someone who's been here a couple of years. And so making sure that they're getting the specific support that they need, in that population or specifically for their situation. One thing that's, again, special to me is this first year reading. It's something that we have only for the first year students. So we have a different book that we have the first year students read, and pre-COVID, we used to have the author of the book, come to campus and have a very large event for our first year students, which I thought was kind of incredible. This year we had a Zoom event, which I thought went well. We have co-curricular events. I think this is something that that's the first thing that students think about when they think about college or university. Are the activities, are the programs, are the clubs, are the ways for you to, engage with the campus, feel like you're a part of the community, make friends. We always joke in my area that we provide the opportunities to do that, and then you just have to take the first step. We can't make the friends for you, but we can create the opportunities for you to get there. So the Academic Success and Tutoring Center, as I mentioned, is a very popular department here on campus. And again, this really goes back to our whole holistic view of the student and their success. So as you can see, they provide a lot of services, and it's very, very popular, with the students. Specifically, sometimes they can be for a specific course, possibly for a math or chemistry or physics class that you're taking. But they also provide not only kind of like this course-based tutoring, but also skill-based tutoring. So can we work on time management skills and creating a planner and doing things like that. Maybe you need a little bit help of learning how to study. Maybe it's something that you didn't need to do so much of and you were successful of in high school, and that maybe have to adjust as you get to the university. And one thing that it's also really interesting that they do is they have public speaking courses, which is not only a requirement here, for Stony, but again, a useful skill to have. They've also recently partnered with Star NY, which is an online tutoring service. And actually they were almost, you know, seeing the future. They started this pre-COVID before everything went online. So that was really set up, you know, for students. So they continue to get these services even if they're not in person. And so, you know, as I said, it's popular, but it's popular because we've also been working with faculty. We've also been working with TAs. So students get feedback in terms of how well they're doing in their courses, and they can try and get help and try and be more successful, you know, before the end of the semester, before they get their grade, right? So they can work on developing these skills, work on understanding the course content, you know, in time enough for them to be successful in the course. And so it's kind of like, again, overlapping circles, right? Overlapping layers of, you know, faculty saying, maybe you're struggling in this particular area, maybe you go to tutoring helps them, they go back to the faculty member, which we know is sometimes a scary thing for students to do. But again, all in the idea of making sure that you can be as successful as you possibly can. And last thing is the Finish in 4 initiative. So as Shelley mentioned, the former president talked to the former president and made a big commitment to change our graduation rates. And, you know, I think we worked smarter here at the university, but that also meant that we also were able to add a couple of advisors who were looking specifically at these class years and really helping students kind of get over the finish line. You know, I think what we were finding as we were working towards increasing these graduation rates it was for some students what seemed to be a minor thing. You know, maybe they took the wrong class, one wrong class, and now they're 3 credits shy, you know, of graduating. Or maybe they didn't know how to kind of fit in their specific major courses with some of the other graduation requirements. And so for us as advisors seemed kind of a minor thing. You know, for students, this is really could be impacting their timely graduation or their ability to graduate at all. You know, they may have gotten some other opportunity. And these advisors really work to strengthen, you know, their 3rd and the 4th year, the junior, getting you to your junior and your senior year and then to graduation. And as you can see, and as we talked about already, the numbers went up significantly. You know, this is really, again, we're very proud of this because it's work that, again, the advisors and some of the other staff have done, but this is your life. You know, this is fantastic for us and for the university, but really it's that, you know, it's that how many was that, over 2,000 students, Shelley?
Yeah, so it's over 2,300 students.
Over 20, I mean, that's yes, it's statistics, but those are people, right? Those are real students, and the impact on their lives, I think, is immeasurable. And so some ways that we, you know, made sure that happened was, you know, we had some mini grants. Again, for some people, it was something happened with my car and now I'm not going to be able to get here for my last semester. You know, could we help them with that? Or financial aid changed a little bit and now, you know, it seems like I'm shy a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000 again for my last year. I'm not going to be able to continue unless we get this mini grant. So this mini grant, I think, really helped a large number of students get over the finish line. And it's something I think that we're hoping, you know, again, we'll continue to help students, you know, as we move forward. And then finally, you know, Shelley talked about technology. You know, it is something that we have and that we try and use with students, again, to think smarter in terms of the work that we're doing. We have the Navigate app. Some of it is student facing. You have it on your phone. You can make appointments with advisors. There's other things that you can do on there. And it's something that, you know, a lot of the advisors and staff use to again, talk to, communicate with, you know, about specific students and try and catch things and help you be successful, you know, as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, I want to reiterate the thing Stacey mentioned, the funding that we had through Finish in 4, and actually that was a really significant way in what we were hearing from students and talking with students. And again, going back to our mission, our public mission around equity, you know, that sometimes, right, it is, you know, it is the case that students might have difficulty making it to the finish line because there's a financial barrier, and sometimes it might be that the financial barrier, you know, so it's not necessarily tens of thousands of dollars. It may be something like you know, your laptop broke, or it might be something. Now we have a laptop loan program, which is fantastic, but it may be something else where it's just you know, a more minor financial barrier, but it can have really, in terms of like cost, but it can have really significant consequences for a student. And we've actually tried to remove those roadblocks, and that's really part of our commitment, has been trying to see a student holistically from a sort of 360-degree perspective about all of the different dimensions that might impact a student and their success here. And you know, I think as you're, you know, going forward and you're making your decisions about school and the right fit and things like that, you know, I can tell you, as I mentioned in the beginning, that this is a place that that believes they are in partnership with students around their success. We hold ourselves accountable to student success, and you know, and I think that the students, you know, the students that come through here, that, you know, are successful here, that then give back into the university, I think are really good illustrations of that. And Stacey, I'm going to call Stacey out as a former Stony Brook student, you know, had a funny story about actually getting a call, right, as a Stony Brook student. Stacey, you want to tell the story just real quick?
Yeah, so one thing I didn't mention is that I went to Stony Brook myself. So both my degrees here, I'm a proud alum of the university, and I'm the director of undergraduate colleges. So I work, you know, closely with first year students. So I always tell students that they made the right choice, you know, when they come here. And this weekend, recently, I was outside doing some work, raking leaves, and I had a call on my cell phone. It said Stony Brook University. So of course, you know, being an employee, I thought it was some type of emergency. So I pick up the phone. And the person says, "Hi, this is James from the Alumni Association. Am I speaking with Anastasia?" And I'm like, "Yes, you are." They're going to ask me for money. And they did. But they also asked me a lot of really interesting questions. And so the first question he asked me is, you know, what I was up to now. And I said, "I'm the director of undergraduate colleges." And the students start laughing. And I said, "You know, were you a student yourself? Were you a first year student, you know, when you started?" And he said, "Yes." And he said the specific undergraduate college, you know, that he was in, and he was telling me about some of the different programs that he went to and his advisor and like things like that. And, you know, one of the questions that he asked me was why I chose Stony Brook. Now, I will say, it's long ago than I care to admit that I was a student, you know, at Stony Brook. And so I told him, you know, I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but the answer that I gave him was, it was a sense that I had. You know, I had done my research. That's how I am. And, you know, I like to make my lists, but I also like to go with my gut. And I just felt like Stony Brook was the place where I could fit in, where I could grow, and then where I could be successful, you know, not knowing then that I can still be here, you know, however many years later, that they would hire me, you know, all those things. You know, for me, it was just, this seemed like a really nice place. And so that's what I shared with him. You know, he asked me a few other questions, but it was just an interesting, I was telling Shelly, it was an interesting story to have.
Did
like,
you,
this weekend.
everybody wants to know, did you donate to the university?
Of course I did.
Right.
I'm like, I think it's like a circle, you know, if they pay me and then I donate back,
right.
but, you know.
Right. Okay, so I just thought that story was, you know, certainly, right, as you look ahead, the place that you feel, sometimes it is a feeling, and sometimes what your priorities are, where your values are. You know, I hope that through this presentation, I think hopefully students, and certainly our students on campus, know that we're really committed to student success, and we take it really seriously. And as I mentioned, hold ourselves accountable to it. So we made a commitment around specific goals. we identified really specific supports, including high tech and high touch opportunities, right? So it has to be, if you're going to go high tech, you have to have a lot of people so that students know and feel that they are cared for in all dimensions that they bring into a university. And, you know, we've had success because we've been able to demonstrate really positive outcomes for students, including moving more students through four-year graduation, through the finish line, into commencement. You know, when I see how much commencement has grown in terms of the number of students, you know, that obviously, you know, not this year, but in the past when we were able to be on the field, you know, really impactful to see that many students, you know, and their successes. Really proud of our equity gaps as well. We take that very seriously, and as well as the fact that, as Stacy mentioned, these are real, you know, like yourselves, these are real students who 7 years ago may have been in a particular percentage of not graduating that we've been able to help move forward. And that has a real impact, not just for their graduation, but also for their economic benefit as they look ahead. So with that, I'm going to end, and there's lots of really interesting questions that I see kind of already coming up in the chat. So I think, you know, if it's okay, unless my admissions colleagues, you know, have a different, you know, want to do any sort of a closing or anything, I'll jump right into answering some of the questions. So, and thank you all for, you know, for sort of sticking with us through this first part, and hopefully we can get to some of the questions that people are asking. So one individual is asking about how Stony Brook views and supports internship and co-op opportunities, and whether this conflicts with a program geared to increase four-year graduate rates. What's actually great about this is in our both our general education curriculum and in some of our majors, that internships and experiential opportunities are actually built in. So part of our Stony Brook curriculum, which is our general education curriculum, actually requires a student to take what we call a 488, which is an internship or experiential opportunity. You know, and that can be any variety of things. And there's a great deal of flexibility for what that looks like. That's both on campus, off campus, research oriented, service oriented. So there's a whole variety of opportunities for that. And we have a fantastic career center that also helps connect students to some of those resources as well. So doesn't conflict at all. It actually is part of what we believe should be the student experience. How can parents best support their student without overstepping? Parents, particularly who want to stay in the loop and know what's happening at the university. Stacy, do you want to share a little bit for the new student perspective?
Yeah, you know, and I'm sure you've all noticed as well that this has changed, you know, with COVID. You know, whereas in the past we've had conversations with students, you know, in person, and their parents were many miles away. You know, this has changed. Really, what we recommend is just having conversations with your, you know, with your student, trying to get the information from them. There are some things that, you know, in terms of privacy and other, you know, laws and guidelines, you know, we're not able to share. But really, you're going to get the best information from your student themselves. And, you know, we'll often have, you know, initial meetings with parents and students together. But we're really trying to work with like the students themselves. You know, we want them to be almost as successful as you want them to be, and trying to do everything we can to make sure that they are, you know, taking ownership of their education. And this is really the difference between, I think, you know, K through 12 and higher education, right? Oftentimes the responsibility for a lot of that falls on parents and guardians and family members. Whereas now we're really trying to transition students to taking the onus and the responsibility for that, you know, on themselves. Again, that's not to say that students have to completely shut you out, but again, I think it's more, how do you work on the conversation, you know, between you and...
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that, you know, what Stacy's referencing is just related to FERPA. So I think, you know, that is a big leap, what we found for both students and families. You know, FERPA in high school is still in the purview of parents or guardians. When a student goes to college, FERPA is essentially now the responsibility of the student. So the relationship, it's a structural change in the relationship between the families and the students. So what I always say to families is to talk that through, like talk about what some of those expectations are, about, you know, how a family member or parent might be involved, and what the student's responsibility or advocacy should be. There's really three, I mean, just for our families out there, there's really three big things about college readiness from the research. One is managing multiple roles. So being able to manage time well on their own, so students on your own managing time. You know, so if you're not setting your own alarm, if you're not waking yourselves up, right, you want to start doing that. That's called building the college mindset, right? You want to start doing that. The other thing is around help seeking. So for students, if you have a go-to person now, like whoever that person is, like if you get stuck on something or if you need help with something, like who's that person you go to now in your current school environment? Think through a little bit. You know, you're not going to necessarily know anyone maybe until you get to the institution that you select, but think through like who is the kind of person that you might want to engage with, like to have be your help seeker, and making an attempt to seek help is really important, regardless of what the need is. And the other thing that's really important is about college knowledge, right? So how do you understand the differences between high school and college? So I always, when I talk to families in particular, I always tell them to reflect on previous transitions with their students. So what kinds of transitions have you as a family or you as a student gone through before? Like, did you move from a junior high to a high school that didn't have lockers or had lockers or whatever it was? Like, and how did you adapt to that kind of transition? Like, did you move houses? Did you move towns? Did you get a new sibling? What does that look like for you in terms of transition, and how did you navigate it? And I think starting those kinds of communications as a family can be really important for building the college mindset. And there's some things you can do now, right, to prep for that, like setting the schedule, like who's doing the laundry, you know, regardless of whether you intend to live on campus or commute, how are you managing your time? Is someone still checking your homework, or checking in on you if you've completed assignments, right? Those are the kinds of things that are not going to happen necessarily when you get into the college environment. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, if I can come to campus next fall due to COVID, if I can't come to campus next fall due to COVID, how will I access the support that I need, such as tutoring, and can I still get an on-campus job? I have to tell you, one of the things that, I don't know if folks are familiar with the Beyond the Expected podcast, but the university puts out a podcast. Myself and some colleagues have been on it several times, once at the beginning before school opened, and then a little bit after, talking about some of our approaches to COVID. And I'm not going to get too far into detail about that. We can maybe push out that podcast if you're interested to hear more about those specifics. But what I will say is that the university has made a real commitment to seamlessly transitioning our services to virtual formats. Some of our services are offered in both in-person and virtual, because we do have an on-campus population here. But many of them are offered, you know, I would say all of them are offered virtually, and maybe not all of them are offered in person, but a good number of them are offered in person. So tutoring is 100% virtual right now. So there's they've been able to transition to a really successful virtual environment. And actually that came from the students. The students really felt, both the tutors and our students here really felt they would be most successful in a tutoring experience if they did not have to worry about, where's my mask? Like, how far apart am I? Like, whose pen did I touch? Right. That kind of thing. And so we took that very seriously. And so services are 100% virtual for tutoring. On-campus jobs, similarly, we do have some physical on-campus jobs for students, but we also have some opportunities that are remote as well. And that just, again, it depends on what employment opportunities are available at any given semester. Okay. Somebody was asking about debt, I think. I don't know if I scroll by, but what's the average college debt that students leave with? My memory from, I think it may have been a few years ago, was about $19,000. I don't want to be misquoted. So, our admissions folks may be able to find the exact number. But the reason why I remember that is because we have been in Money Magazine for several years as some of the best value one of the best value institutions, relative to, a number of factors, but certainly tuition being a big one, and particularly in-state tuition. So it's an extremely good value institution as a top public, with a very significant, research agenda, and university hospital, and university medicine on the one side of campus. So, in terms of the exact number that it is right now in 2020, I'm not sure we could get that information, but I think if you go and you look at some of the, Forbes, Money Magazine, we have moved significantly in terms of those rankings as far as a best value institution, best value university, which we're also very proud of, because we want that to be the case. We want it to be, a high impact for students at low cost, because that's really what, what higher education should be. Okay, there's another question about actually several questions about college debt. Okay, just scrolling through here. Internships, yes, internships are definitely available. I think we talked about that a little bit. When do you have to declare a major? Do students apply to the school or to a particular major? Stacey, you want to talk a little bit about declaring a major or some of the major implications?
Yeah, for the most part, students can declare their we tell students to declare their major when they know what they want to declare. So, but there are financial aid implications if you don't declare by the time you get your 57th credit. But a good number of our students will declare, within their first year. Sometimes they would have had an idea of what they wanted to do, or sometimes they would have taken a course that really sparked their interest. That's true for the overall majority of our majors. There are some programs though where you have to take prerequisites, take a certain number of courses, or do well in a certain number of courses and then apply to the program. So some of you may know that we have the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and then we do have quite a few programs in the School of Health Technology and Management. So some of the medical field related programs, professional schools, where you do have to apply and be accepted. So often that will happen for engineering. That normally happens around your sophomore year, is when you would apply after having taken these courses. And then for the other, medical professional schools, and professional programs, that it will often happen, for you to start your junior year. So, still have a good amount of time. I will say though that, both nationally and at Stony Brook, students change their majors a lot all the time, and that's okay. That's really what we want. We want you to have enough information to make an informed decision, and that's really what, for a lot of the majors where you have to apply, that's what they're hoping that you do, that you're not only going to make an informed decision, but, be successful, in that major as well.
Yeah, and actually a question just came in about the process of switching majors, and it's fairly streamlined. Essentially I think at this point they've actually moved it. It used to be paper. I think one of the good, not that there have been good things in terms of the impact to people around COVID, but I think it has certainly forced, some of this more paper environment, right, to become more digital. So there is actually a digital process for that to the individual who asked about switching majors. And I will say, just since we have kind of hopefully a relatively captive audience, to Stacey's point about switching majors, we always tell students, try to, if you're not happy in a major, try to switch, don't linger in it, right? Don't continue to linger, because what we've actually found is that the longer a student lingers in a major, particularly if they get beyond their second year, then actually it becomes a little bit harder, right, for when they switch the major to kind of catch up. So because they've lingered, right, because they think, well, I'm just going to stick it out. There's nothing wrong with switching majors. We know the majority of students switch at least once. And so I think, there are resources to help you make those kinds of decisions, and people to help you make those kinds of decisions, so you're not on your own about that. So just make sure to always reach out and ask if you feel like it's not a fit, or if you feel like you're not. You should be passionate, you should be excited, and really it should be something you really want to do. It's not that it's not hard. And sometimes it's, you might not be in some of your major classes until a little bit later, right? So you're taking more of the gen eds in the beginning, but you should really get excited by what that major is going to be. All right, let's keep looking here. How do you support commuting students? We have a really significant commuter population. We always have had a significant commuter population, and I think even more so you've seen now in this particular environment, people making the choices, to commute. And as some of our courses have gone online. And so we have actually a dedicated department to commuting students that liaises with many of our other areas around the needs of commuting students. And that ranges all from different kinds of support services, but also to social opportunities. There's actually a mentor program for commuters with other commuters. So you can have an experienced student who is a commuter be a mentor to you, either for a year or for a longer period of time, as well as other social opportunities to connect with similarly situated students. And then the other question is about whether students have one advisor for all 4 years. In most instances, no. In some instances, yes. So so for some of the groups like the Honors College or the Scholars Program, EOP, they may have an advisor for all 4 years. In the undergraduate colleges, for the first year, you have an assigned advisor. So if you come in as a first year student, you come in and you'll have an assigned advisor. After the first year, you then transition to the Academic and Transfer Advising Services Office, and the class year advisors also become involved with you. So you have kind of a dual support system there. When you start to get into your major courses as well, you have advisors within the major that are really there to support you with some of your major questions and actually help you connect within the major, because that becomes really important too, not just from an advising perspective, but increasing your professionalization, right, as a student in this major is one of the goals that they have as well. All right, let's see. I think we have a couple more minutes, right? There's a question, and I don't. This might be best, for our admissions folks. I don't know if the slideshow is going out afterwards, but certainly, if it is, we can make sure, to get it out. Okay, I'm just looking here. Oh, study abroad programs. So we have an international academic programs office, which you can actually go online and you can take a look and see. As you probably know, with COVID, many of the study abroad programs were paused temporarily as internationally we try to sort out what's going on with the virus, but it's a fantastic study abroad program with a lot of really interesting places, and there's different levels. So it's like you can go on a semester abroad, you can go, there's intersession abroad experiences. There's also what's called national student exchange, where you can exchange, study away actually in the United States. And there's some really interesting places that many of our students go to, including, Alaska and Hawaii and the Virgin Islands, and they study various things depending on what their areas of interest are. Okay, let's see if we can get one more question in here. Some of these I've answered, I'm sorry. Oh, someone is asking about the difference between the Honors College-wise and University Scholars in terms of opportunities offered. They are all a little bit different. And what I would actually recommend is I would go online. I would look to see the different offerings. So the Honors College has actually a mini curriculum. They have a very specific curriculum that as an Honors College student, you would need to complete in addition to it overlaps quite a bit with, with majors or with, SBCs and things like that, but you need to complete in addition. Whereas Scholars does not. WISE also has a kind of mini curriculum as well. They have, I think similarly, they have access to, assigned advisors. There are seminar programs for students. There are social and academic support events. So there's community building within those particular special sort of subpopulations that we have here. And so what I would do is I would actually, in terms of the opportunities and what interests you, would go on and try to look a little bit to see the different flavors of the honors groups. And again, in terms of the eligibility as well. Stacey, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think again, you know, it's trying to make sure that you have a person that you can work with. You know, one of the benefits of those programs is they are the 4 years, and I think they also all three generally try to work with students to get them involved in terms of research and internship opportunities and some of these outside of classroom experiences that we know are so valuable and important.
Great. So actually there is one more question, and maybe what I'll do is I'll end with that, since I know that we're running out of time. But one of the questions was about, you know, why choose Stony Brook, or, you know, why choose Stony Brook as a public institution, as opposed to a private institution. And, you know, and I certainly, you know, would never disparage any of our, you know, our private peers. I think, you know, the immediate thing obviously that jumps out is cost. I think one of the big differences between a public institution like Stony Brook and a SUNY institution, and often a private institution, is really going to be around tuition. And I think that's something that that students and families really need to think about. And relative to tuition, what the opportunities will be, what the networks and access are. We know that Stony Brook has, you know, very significant networks all across different research areas, and certainly within the medical school, you know, and again at a very low cost. And it's, you know, I think it has a different flavor. I mean, certainly public and private institutions have very different flavors in that way. And so I think to Stacey's point before is, you know, what feels right to you. So if cost is not a consideration, you know, I think at that point, you know, that you go with, you know, kind of what you, you know, what do these institutions have your major becomes really important, you know, and what kinds of opportunities within that major will help you as you move beyond, you know, your 4 years and into whatever comes next is also really important. So, you know, so I think those are considerations, cost obviously being the big one. I mean, from my perspective, you know, as I think, you know, if you've sat through the webinar today, you know, we at Stony Brook, you know, because of our public mission, feel strongly about our obligation to support students. And again, to try to provide opportunities for students with academic excellence, high social mobility, at low cost. And I think that's, you know, in summary, for folks that are making decisions about public or private institutions, you know, that would be, you know, those would be some of the things that I would look at. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time. I think what I read was that the recording of this will be posted so that, you know, if folks want to go back, you want to take a look, you have our contact information here. So please feel free if you have, you know, additional questions, you want to reach out. You know, I'm happy to you know, speak with any of you over email. And I really wish you the best of luck as you move forward and you make these decisions, and, you know, stay safe. And, you know, and hope you have a really great, you know, for those of you that are finishing up either, you know, your senior in high school, or those of you that might be at other institutions considering transferring, I hope you have a really great rest of the semester. So thank you very much for joining us today.